Hello, this is April Sproule from Sproule Studios, and today I wanted to show you how to do a split stitch, hand embroidery stitch that I use for stitching lettering and text. So I'm working with 2 strands of embroidery floss, and you can't do this with this technique with 1 strand. You have to have at least 2. So I'm starting at the left here, coming up from the back side, and I'm doing small little stitches. And then as I start my second stitch, I'm going to go in over about a little more than, or a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm coming back up exactly in my previous stitches. And that's why you need more than 1 strand of thread. Okay? So you're coming back up and you're catching those stitches. So it's just a slight variation on the stem stitch, but I'll show you in a minute. So again, I'm going to the right, 1 stitch, and then I'm coming up, instead of coming up right in the hole, like you would with a regular stem stitch, which would be like this, right? And not catching that previous thread, then you come up and you catch that thread. Just a tiny bit, like maybe 1/16 of an inch. Pull your thread tight, okay? Another stitch, and come up there, okay? And what this does is it keeps it from, when you catch that stitch like that, it keeps it from getting all wonky and ugly on the curves. So to finish that off, I would just pull it through to the back. There's the stitch, okay? And now we're just going to go over here. 1, 2, not catching your fabric. And then just pull it tightly. Okay, so now I will show you how I would stitch a curve and why this stitch is so great. All right, so obviously when you're stitching text, you have a lot of curves, tight little curves, depending on how big your text is, especially for cursive writing or any kind of script. Okay, so again, I'm going in and then I'm catching that stitch. So I'm going to the right and then back up right in that last stitch. Not in the hole, but I'm actually catching that. And that keeps it from being really unattractive on the curves. So you'll see when you get to the top up here. You want to make sure you have the correct tension on your thread so it's not puckering your fabric, but it's your stitches are nice and somewhat tight and even, because you don't want them to be too loose and sloppy. So now I'm going around the curve. So anytime you're stitching curves, especially a tight curve like this, it's a really good idea to take shorter stitches, all right? So I'm just turning it as I work. And of course, I'm doing the stitching without an embroidery hoop, as I always do. Tiny little stitch. And then after I get around the curve, then I can start going longer with my stitches again. Okay. So now I can lengthen my stitches out a little bit. And then here I can just go, I could either go underneath or I could go over the top here if I didn't really care. But oops, I'm going to go underneath. Because then where they cross over, it won't be quite so heavy. All right. Couple of more stitches here. And you can also do text with a back stitch, but it's a little bit more jerky. It doesn't curve as well. And so I really like this method. Tie my threads off. And then let's see if we can get a really good close-up shot of this for you. Okay, so there you go. And you can see how clean the curve